Hey everyone, I'm Antonia Lofaso. Welcome to my home. So excited to do this cook along with you guys. We are gonna make an olive oil poached cod with capers and olives and pine nuts and fresh herbs and tomato. And this is part of the Feast of Seven Fishes, which is an Italian-American tradition that's celebrated on Christmas Eve, and the entire meal is primarily made up of seafood. All right, so let's do some housekeeping tips before we start cooking. I like to have all of my ingredients out, and I like to have all of my equipment out so that I'm not kind of looking for things in the fridge or rummaging through cabinets to find what I need in the moment. I like to have everything in front of me organized, cleaned, and ready to go. People ask all the time, how do I learn how to cook so fast? How did you learn how to have such fast knife skills? And honestly, it's all through practice, but really it's through cleanliness and organization. So this is a dish that actually has very few ingredients, and it seems like it could be a little difficult because we're gonna olive oil poach fish, which is, it can be a technique that seems scary, okay? Because we're gonna just heat oil, we're gonna season the oil a little bit with a little bit of basil and garlic, but we're gonna heat the oil to about 115, 120 degrees. We're not gonna let it get any hotter, and we're gonna just let the cod take a bath in that oil, and then we're gonna pull it out and dress it in this sauce. So it's a very simple dish, but there's a lot of technique that goes into this dish, and I think you're gonna enjoy the technique, and it's something new to learn. It's also a dish that this time of year takes a little bit of effort, takes a little bit of time, and takes a little patience, and that's okay. This is the time of the year to explore and to try new things. All right, let's start with the tomato sauce. So first I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just crush a little bit of garlic and get my garlic ready to go. This is a great sauce because it really just utilizes fun pantry staples like olives and capers. So there really isn't much prep that goes into it. There's just some jars that are open and some cans that are opened and some garlic that's crushed. So I'm gonna go ahead and crush and open some of this garlic. And if you wanna go ahead and buy an already peeled garlic, I'm into that. That to me is a completely legal purchase when it comes to cooking because I just think it's a great product. I mean, I like to crush and chop garlic the old-fashioned way, where I kind of just take a clove of garlic, smash it with the back of my knife in my hand, press it to the other side and peel it, but already peeled garlic works really, really well. The only thing I would tell you not to purchase is that already minced or chopped garlic that's jarred in your produce section. I do think that garlic gives a little bit of a different flavor than the true traditional raw garlic that I love. But I have to say, this is something that I love, to just kind of crush, peel garlic, the smell of garlic, the feel of garlic on my hands. It really reminds me of when my mom would cook any kind of Sunday supper, or really any kind of tomato sauce in my house, but really especially the Feast of Seven Fish, that she would start 2 or 3 days in advance, and she would be peeling garlic every morning. I would smell it. She'd be frying garlic every morning in some kind of sauce that I would smell it, and she would be up sometimes 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Absolutely love to get all the cooking done first thing in the morning. So I would wake up sometimes so early to the wafting smell of sizzling garlic in olive oil, with depending on whatever sauce or ragu she was making. But I absolutely love the smell. You know, some people like coffee in the morning. I like the smell of raw garlic. I know it's weird. Had a conversation the other day that I thought garlic should be a perfume smell. I would put it behind my ears and be so excited to sport it outside. So just some raw garlic. We're gonna chop. Now there's a little piece to the garlic, which is basically the stem, the root, if you will, that kind of holds the bulb together, that a lot of chefs will tell you to pull off. To me, it's something that I do in the restaurant, but I don't really do when I'm cooking at home. I really feel like we're gonna chop this garlic so fine that it's really not gonna be that big of a deal. And it's just gonna kind of melt into the sauce. And I'd love to meet the person one day that can actually find that stem and point it out. I guarantee you're not gonna be able to find the person. Now I'm gonna reserve 2 of these cloves of garlic that are gonna go inside of my oil, and that's gonna be the oil to poach. So I'm just gonna leave 2 whole garlic cloves on the side that are crushed, just kind of open and broken, so that we can actually get the flavor of the oil. The rest I'm gonna chop and put in the tomato sauce. So I'm just gonna run my knife over the garlic to initially give it a nice rough chop. Over and over again, And then once most of it has a nice rough chop to it, I'm gonna bring it to the center of my board, and then we'll really get into the nitty-gritty of making sure that the garlic is nicely minced. So I kind of put the garlic all in the center of my board. I don't like when the garlic is all over the place. You want to keep what you're doing right in the center of your board. You're in control of the food on your board. The food on your board is not in control of you. I like to say that because, you know, it's all about confidence in the kitchen. It's all about having confidence and being sure of yourself. And a lot of the different techniques to really become a confident cook and to become like a fluid cook. And when I say fluid, it's like I feel confident in my movements because I know my ingredients are where they should be. I feel confident in my movements because I know all my equipment is where it should be. And I take my time. You know, I think a lot of the conversation these days is about people rushing through cooking, about getting it onto the table as fast as it possibly can be made. And there is a lot of joy that's brought by taking your time and chopping garlic. There's a lot of joy that's brought into taking your time and creating a sauce from scratch. You know, it's this thing where you can teach yourself and even your loved ones to find the joy in those small little things of creating something. And that is what cooking is. So it's great if you want to go quick on like a Taco Tuesday, but this is the holiday cooking. These are holiday recipes. This is when you want to slow down, you know, smell the chopped garlic and enjoy your time in the kitchen. And instead of looking at it like a task, you look at it as a time of enjoyment. And just from that little change of mindset of being like, oh my God, I have to get it done, to I'm in here and I'm enjoying it and I smell garlic and look at the basil, it's so beautiful. Suddenly the whole process becomes enjoyable. Okay, so we've got the garlic chopped. I've got a Dutch oven that I'm going to turn up to a medium-high. Pour some olive oil in. Now you guys have all of these recipes here. If you see me just flinging olive oil and throwing garlic into a pan, just know that I am the professional in the conversation. And you can trust that I have all of the ingredients and the quantities correct, but you guys follow along in the recipe. So I've got that garlic, and we're gonna start that garlic in the pan, and we're just gonna let it soften. We don't want to get any color in it. We just want it to soften. And I'm going to go ahead and get my canned tomatoes opened. And this is a San Marzano style tomato. Okay, San Marzano tomatoes are varietal that grow in Italy. And we have those style tomatoes here in the United States. And these are actually just a crushed tomato. So if you think of it almost looks like a Roma tomato, the sort of long tomatoes that have been deskinned and just kind of crushed. So there's a little bit more texture and some seeds in there as well. And I love that crushed texture for this tomato in this application because we want it to be chunky. This whole sauce is gonna have this beautiful chunk of tomato, the saltiness and the brininess of capers and olives. And we have Niçoise olives that have a beautiful creaminess to them. And then we're gonna do some pine nuts, some fresh herbs, and then those caramelized shallots. So it's a perfect tomato for this dish. So we're just gonna let that garlic just start to soften, to bloom, to allow the oils of the garlic to come together in the olive oil, and then we'll add the tomato. And I'm not gonna add a lot of salt to this dish because we've got great olives and great capers. I have to say, when people ask me what should always be in a pantry, obviously salt, pepper, obviously olive oil and a good vinegar, maybe some chili flakes, then I can really make a dish out of anything, but capers and olives, possibly an anchovy, and then you have a real meal. Okay, so as the garlic is just sort of simmering and blooming in the olive oil, I'm gonna add a pinch of chili flake and then the tomato. So there is actually a good amount of olive oil in this tomato sauce. You almost want to see the flecks of olive oil throughout it, okay? So it's like olive oil, it's tomato, it's garlic. This is a very, very Mediterranean dish with the olives and the capers, but the olive oil, it's not to be meant to be oily. It's really meant to flavor and add that sort of buttery creaminess from the olive oil in the tomato sauce. So I just drained some kalamata olives, You always got to eat one or two right before they go in. We're just gonna throw those olives into the sauce. Just let those start to stew. Now I'm gonna put the sauce on a medium. I don't want it to simmer, but what I want the tomato to do is cook out. We don't want a raw tomato. We want to really be able to taste the tomato, all the tomato goodness, the sweetness from the tomato. So what it's going to do as we let it simmer and mix in with this capers and olives and garlic, we're just going to let it reduce, and all that water is going to evaporate, and we're going to get a concentrated tomato flavor with the garlic and the capers and the olives. Okay, so we've got those beautiful San Marzano crushed tomatoes stewing with olives and capers and chili flake and olive oil. And now we're gonna work on the caramelized shallots. So I've got 6 shallots that I'm gonna go ahead and just do a fine shave to. You can use a mandolin for it, or I'm gonna use my knife, but I'm gonna just start in my pan, a little bit of olive oil and butter, okay? The reason for this is I want to caramelize the onion, meaning I want the natural sugar from the shallot to brown and that sugar to really come out and caramelize and get kind of crispy edges and soft translucent, but nice and dark and brown. If I add olive oil and butter, olive oil is gonna prevent the butter from getting brown too quickly before the shallot has a chance to cook. And then the butter is gonna add to the caramelization and the browning process, but not to the point where there's no return. So butter and olive oil together. The butter is what's gonna help create the caramelization, and the olive oil is just to help the butter not get too brown too quickly. Okay, so just on a medium-low temperature, I've got that olive oil and butter in a sauté pan, slowly melting and coming together. And now I'm gonna go ahead and just shave these shallots. So both ends cut in half and peeled. Sometimes there's like all these random pieces of shallot that come off where they're not like specifically round. That's okay. In this application, we're not doing a small dice or anything like that. We're actually gonna do a shave. So they don't have to be perfect. Once they get into a pan and start to caramelize, you won't even know the difference. I promise, I promise. So let's go ahead and peel these. You can buy shallots pre-peeled, but it doesn't really take that long, so. But just know that you can, and that is totally legal as well. So go ahead and pull these. I just think shallots are like such a great part of the onion family. Ooh, tearing up a little bit, that's okay. I like to say, you know, they're a little sweeter than an onion, and then they almost have this like garlic flavor to them. Oh. I remember when my daughter was very little and I would get up so early to cook in the morning. And it was mostly just kind of like maybe to prep before a holiday or something for her lunch, or to maybe just have dinner ready late. And I was cutting onions one morning and she came in, she couldn't have been more than like 3 or 4 years old. And she just looked at me and she's like, "Mommy, are you okay?" I'm like, "Yes, it's fine. I'm just cutting onions." Now, if it takes you a little bit longer to cut the shallots and your oil has already gotten hot with the butter, you can just turn that off and let it wait for you. And that's just a skill. I'm basically trying to get you guys to multitask, right? It's not cut the shallot and then warm the butter and then stand there and wait for the butter to melt. It's kind of teaching you how to do a couple of things at once, but being aware of the things that are happening in the kitchen, right? So it's not like I have this task and I'm just peeling this shallot. It's like, okay, I have this task, I'm peeling the shallot. I know that I have butter melting. Let's make sure the butter doesn't get too dark. If it does, let's turn it down. We can always turn it back up. I'm simmering my sauce right now, but I can stop and I can stir my sauce and just make sure that that water is evaporating. And I see all the beautiful capers and olives floating in the olive oil with the garlic and the tomatoes. And then I come back to my shallots, I clean my board. And it's just, that's what I'm talking about when I talk about flow in the kitchen. It's this constant movement of a grouping of things that you need to get done, but you feel it, right? Oh, I can smell something in the oven. It's almost done. Let me stop my cutting and check the oven. So it's not one thing at a time. It's multiple things at a time. And the better that you get and the more practice that you have, you'll be able to do 6 or 7 things at once and people are gonna be like, oh my goodness, how did you make that incredible meal so quick and so efficiently, and your kitchen doesn't even look like anything happened? That should be your goal. Now, it seems like this is a lot of shallots, but once we start caramelizing, they cook down to nothing. So it feels like a lot of shallots, but it really isn't. We're gonna just do some quick slices. And when you see me flip the shallot, right, I'll do a couple of slices here. And again, they don't have to be the same size. You know, it's okay, they're gonna cut down. But when I see it get small, I like to flip it on its side, and then that gives me more surface space to work with. So you'll see it again. So I start here, 2, 3. Oh my goodness, it's gotten a little too hard for me to hold on to. I flip it on its side, and then I keep going. So I want to keep it on a stable side at all times, and when I feel like it's no longer stable, I kind of let it fall to its side. Watch this, ready? No longer stable, flip it to its side, and now it's stable. Show you again. Flip it to its side, now it's stable again. Here's the other thing too, right? I've got about half of the shallots already sliced. The butter is already melted with the olive oil. Feel free to throw those bad boys in there and start the cooking process while you finish chopping the rest of the shallots. Okay, so I've got half of the shallots cooking. Those are starting. And again, this just moves the cooking process a little bit faster, right? Now, if you don't feel secure in your knife skills and it was taking a long time, then definitely wait for all the shallots to be cut. But just know that I love to teach multitasking. And if you feel confident and you want to do it, you should. So inside of the butter and olive oil and shallots, we're going to add a little bit of salt, and we're also going to add some sugar. Now, shallots, onions, anything really in the onion family already have a lot of natural sugar in them, but we're gonna add just a little bit more just to help the caramelization process along. This isn't enough sugar to make the dish sweet. It's just enough sugar to really assist in the caramelization process. And really, this entire dish is like a stew, right? It's a fish stew, if you will. It's a stew of capers and olives, chili flake and garlic and tomatoes with a ton of olive oil. And then it's a stew of shallots. The shallots is sitting in butter, a little bit of olive oil, some sugar to help it along, and some salt. Now, as the shallots start to break apart, you want to help them out a little bit, right? So that there's butter and olive oil and salt and sugar touching every aspect of the shallot. And there's also these little crevices, like one seeps into another. It almost looks like two little spiders with each other. So you want to kind of pull them out of their crevices so that all of the shallot breaks up and it cooks evenly, so we don't have smaller pieces and larger, wider pieces, just like that. Just give it a little toss. We're just going to let these go on a medium to low. Let them caramelize, let them get nice and soft and sugary. They're gonna be so good on top of that fish. So cod is a super traditional fish served in Italian cooking, especially around Christmas for the Feast of Seven Fishes. When I was growing up, we would have dishes like bacalhau, which is basically a salted cod. And we would have this in a stew, or sometimes we would have it as a fritter. So this is kind of my version, you know, a different, more progressive version of doing a stewed fish without using the salted bacalhau and using a fresh ling cod. So this tomato sauce there's gonna be a good sort of olive oil content to it, where you almost see these sort of swooshes of olive oil through the tomato, and then it has the olives and the capers. And then all we wanna do is really cook out the tomato so it has a beautiful, brightness about it, but also very sweet. Tomatoes are very naturally sweet. The capers and the olives are gonna add that natural salinity to it. And then we've got the shallots that are gonna braise, that are gonna be so buttery and so perfect. And now we can get ready to do the cod. But before we do the cod, actually, let's do some toasted pine nuts. Pine nuts are really gonna add the texture to this dish. So cod is really beautifully soft, plus we're olive oil poaching it, so it's gonna be very nice and soft. The tomato sauce has elements of texture to it with the olives, but nothing really crunchy. And I think pine nuts are such a great addition. They're a subtle flavor. There's a beautiful sort of nuttiness to them, creaminess to them as well. And we're just gonna lightly toast these pine nuts in a pot. You can also do this in your oven. I like to see everything controlled right on my stovetop. Okay, we're gonna do a little musical chairs. Okay, now it's time to get ready for the olive oil poached fish. This is gonna take a good amount of olive oil because you basically want your fish to take a bath inside of the olive oil. So think about it, when we take baths, we want our whole body submerged. Same thing goes for the cod. We want to be able to submerge the entire piece of cod, top to bottom, in olive oil, so it does take a good amount of olive oil. But remember that oil expands as it heats. You want to just make sure there's a little bit of space between the pan, the fish, and the olive oil. So the olive oil is heating. We're going to throw those 2 cloves of garlic inside and a sprig of basil just to season our olive oil. And we're just going to let that oil come to temperature at a low to medium flame. Okay, we don't want to get too aggressive with it. We want the fish, again, to sit in a very low temperature olive oil bath. Okay, so we have some ling cod. Again, this is just another version of using cod during the holidays. Cod is super traditional around Christmas, especially for Italians. Usually we use a salted cod, so we're gonna use a ling cod here. I'm just gonna cut some nice fillets. Save that for later. Beautiful thing about cod is that it's a very neutral flavored fish. It's got a high fat content, beautifully flaky, but it really holds up to aggressive flavors. The flavors of capers and olives and tomatoes. It holds its shape, it holds its form, but at the same time, really takes on the flavor without getting lost. Okay, so the tomato sauce is stewing. So we've got the stew of tomatoes with the capers, the olives, the chili flake, the garlic, ton of olive oil. That's ready to go. All that water has evaporated and we've got the concentrated flavor of tomatoes. Perfect. We've got pine nuts that are just gently toasting. Now, toasting nuts are like sometimes the kiss of death for people because you put them on, you're like, yeah, fine, fine, fine. And now I'm like, oh my goodness, the pine nuts. Really got to pay attention. As the pan starts to get warm, nuts go from perfect to over toasted like that. So we're just gonna keep giving those a little shake. And of course, we've got the caramelized onions just kind of doing their thing in the background. You know, they're like, don't worry, I'm just back here caramelizing. Don't bother me, I'm fine. Don't really need to pay much attention to them. There's a good amount of fat, as there should be in this dish. And those onions are just gonna continue to soften, and the butter, the olive oil, and the sugar is just gonna take it over the edge, creating that beautiful caramelization. The pine nuts just toasting away. Give a little taste to this chunky caper olive tomato sauce. Perfect. We're gonna add a little bit of black pepper. And a little bit of salt. Now that the dish has come together and I've been able to taste the salinity of the capers and the salinity of the olives, I know that I can add my salt now. I think it's really important to season food as you go, right? So we want to season from start to finish. But there are times when you're using, you know, pantry staples like olives and capers that have such a high salinity level that you want to be careful with your salt. So I'm adding salt at the very, very end to my tomato sauce so I can really see what those olive and capers do. And the same thing with the fish. Once I know what my tomato sauce tastes like, okay, and I know what that salt level content is because I'm using condiments or pantry staples that I wasn't in control of the salt, I really need to pay attention to the salt content, and then I can go ahead and season the fish once I know what that tastes like. So now that I do know, I'm gonna just go ahead and season this fish with a little bit of salt, both sides. I had a culinary teacher say to me once, right? I always say this to my students when I'm teaching someone how to cook. He said, do I season both sides of the fish? I'm like, well, do you eat both sides of the fish? Okay. So I see the basil starting to just wilt in that oil. The pine nuts are beautifully toasted. I'm going to take them out of the pot. We're just going to reserve these for later. Now that the basil has done its job and it has seasoned my oil, I'm going to remove it from the oil. Same thing with the garlic. We're going to remove the garlic from the oil now that I've done my job in seasoning. So you want to let your oil get to about 115, 120 degrees, and then we're just gonna lay that cod in there, and it's just gonna bathe. So we really wanna make sure that the temperature for the olive oil to poach the fish is exactly where I need it to be. When fish is either poached too quickly or seared too quickly, the natural fat will actually start to sort of dollop on the outside of the fish. Sometimes there'll be that little white fat packet that you'll see in salmon or in halibut or in cod, and that's actually the beautiful natural fat of the fish leaking out faster than it should. It really should be able to stay intact so that we get to eat that in the way that we want to. How are those caramelized shallots doing? Perfect and beautiful. Can you believe all of those shallots cooked down to just this? So I said it seems like it's a lot of shallots, but I promise you we need all of them. Okay, so as we are waiting, I feel like we can probably stick that fish in there. Let's see. Yes. This beautiful chunky tomato olive sauce is almost ready to go. I'm gonna throw 2 sprigs of rosemary in there and just let it steep. We'll pull those out. I'm gonna add my fish to the olive oil and just let that poach. So we've got all of that beautiful cod fully submerged in the olive oil. Perfect, perfect, perfect. And we're just gonna let it bathe. This is gonna take about 10 to 12 minutes in the olive oil. And while that's poaching, I'm just gonna put a little bit of paper towel onto a sheet tray so that once the fish is ready, I'm gonna pull it out with a fish spatula. I wouldn't recommend doing this with a spoon or with any kind of fork. It really needs to be a slotted, flat spatula so that we don't break up the fish. It's gonna be very, very gentle. It needs to be very, very gentle. The fish is very delicate. So I have my fish spatula all ready to go. So as soon as that fish is ready in the olive oil, I'm gonna pull it out. I'm gonna stick it on a sheet tray with a little bit of paper towel so that it drains, and then we can plate the entire dish. In the meantime, we will get ready for the garnish, which is gonna be this beautiful herb, pine nut, olive oil topping that's gonna go on top of the fish in all of that stewed tomato. So I'm just gonna clear my board. I have my pine nuts here. Just checking my fish. Perfect. We're gonna take some leaves of basil. So beautiful, smells so good. And just gently pick them. The stem of the basil we can't really use. It's a little too aggressive. I have to say though, when I make a pesto or any kind of salsa verde and I stick basil in the blender, I throw everything in. Maybe not the far end of the basil, but a good part of it. So we've just got some basil that I'm going to give a very, very rough cut to. I want to leave this basil as sort of whole and flowering as possible, right? This whole dish is very rustic, very Mediterranean. Whole olives, whole pieces of caper, large pieces of basil, the nuts, the olive oil. So I'm gonna just throw that in there like that. We're gonna put also just some fresh parsley. Sometimes I like to use a scissor with my herbs. Sometimes that is a thing, right? Especially if you have like little herb plants, you can kind of just, let's see, you can kind of just cut away what you need. I also think it's a really nice way of not bruising the herb. Sometimes when your knives aren't as sharp as you like them to be, a scissor is one way to just kind of cut stuff off its stem. I use scissors so much inside of the kitchen. Sometimes people are like, why do you have scissors? Are they just for fish? I'm like, no. If I can cut anything with scissors, I will try. So we're gonna do just a little bit of salt in there, just a splash of olive oil, just to kind of give it a little help. And I'm gonna take a spoon and I'm just gonna kind of mix this pine nut herb mixture. The baby spoon. I grabbed my daughter's old baby spoon. Maybe we won't use that for this. She's 20 and I still have her baby spoons in there. It's amazing. So just a little bit of olive oil and salt with that basil and that fresh flat leaf Italian parsley. So we're gonna use that just as a garnish. Let's clean up and get ready for this fish. All right, we are ready to plate this. Let's check our fish. So I like to pull the fish out with a slotted fish spatula, which is a flat fish spatula. It'll drain off that excess oil. And I already have a piece of paper towel laid out on a sheet tray. So how I like to test the fish is by using touch, okay? I love to teach people that very intuitive cooking and to touch and kind of press your food to really understand the temperature. So my daughter likes to say that I have chef fingers, so I can touch very, very hot food and it doesn't bother me. So if this is a little too hot for you, you can put gloves on. It will give you the same feeling on the fish, but it'll just kind of protect you from the heat. But that's years of me cooking. But if you kind of just press the fish, you can see how it breaks here. There's still a firmness to it, which is great. There's gonna be some carryover cooking, but this means that the fish is perfect. It's giving me a little bit, right? You can see this moving here. So there's a little bit of give, a little bit of firmness in the middle, and I kind of do this to all of them, right? Now, if the fish feels very firm, there's no give, there's no kind of crease opening, they're not done yet, okay? But I like to give them just a little squeeze, and I can see that the ends are starting to kind of break, and the middle still has a little bit of firmness, and that's what you want. I'm gonna let those fish drain on the paper towel so that all of the excess oil can come off, the cooking oil, and we will start to plate. So I have the beautiful stew of tomatoes, and I love that we threw the rosemary in at the very, very end because it just kind of gives this subtle flavor and aroma of rosemary versus rosemary that's kind of been stewed for long periods of time, which sometimes can get a little aggressive. Rosemary is definitely one of those herbs that just breaks your door down. It's not a gentle knock at the door. It is like, hi, I'm Rosemary and I'm here. So this is a beautiful dish, I think, plattered because the tomatoes and the olives and the capers and that olive oil, we want to see everything. And you kind of see how the olive oil separates from the tomato. I love that. That is a beautiful flavored olive oil right there. That has all the nuances of the garlic and the chili flake and the rosemary. And don't mistake that from being over oiled. This is like very Mediterranean. And then we're gonna take the cod and just gently place the cod throughout the dish like this. And then we're gonna just take this herb pine nut mixture that has just a little bit of olive oil and salt. Oh, wait, actually, hold on. How can I forget the caramelized shallots? Let's just do a little bit of caramelized shallot up and over the fish. And again, we want some of that butter. We want some of that oil to fall into the sauce as well as coat the fish. Just like that. Up and around. And then we will take all of this pine nut herb goodness and just kind of garnish every fish with it. Just like so. So this is my olive oil poached cod with a stew of tomatoes, olives, capers, caramelized shallots, pine nuts, and herbs. That looks good. First, I just want to say that this is definitely the most Christmas looking dish I've ever made. But it just looks so beautiful. And I think it's just plattered so perfectly. It's so inviting. If you see a dish with all of these beautiful colors and the pine nuts and the fresh herbs and the smell of rosemary, it's so Mediterranean. The beautiful olive oil flecked with the pine nuts, all of the capers and olives and tomatoes, the fresh herbs. Ugh. And this is a dish that can sit really, really nicely because the cod is olive oil poached. So actually the longer that it sits in all of this beautiful tomato stew, it'll actually get better. So good. The texture of the olive oil poached cod is so silky, so luscious, perfectly cooked. It just kind of flakes away and breaks away into that beautiful stewed tomato. That's why we use crushed tomatoes. So there's these, sort of larger chunks of tomato, but then there's a puree of tomato as well. The olives, the Niçoise olives, there's a creaminess to it, but then a saltiness. And then the capers just make it so perfectly salty. The pine nuts add this sort of perfect texture and crunch and creaminess. The fresh herbs on top as they just start to warm in that beautifully flavored rosemary oil with the tomatoes is just, it's like bright and refreshing, but this dish is so balanced. And the dish is very light. It seems like it's a stew of tomatoes, but a lot of light flavors. The tomatoes are very bright. The fresh herbs are very bright. The olives and the capers really kind of make you feel like this is a great starter for the Feast of Seven Fish. Guys,